The year is 1794, and the cobblestones of the place, du Trône Renverse, are slick with a sludge of mud and human blood that the summer sun refuses to dry. It is July 17th, the height of the Great Terror, and the air in Paris hangs heavy, thick with the iron scent of death and the cloying sweetness of rotting waste. The guillotine, that towering machine of efficiency, stands silhouetted against the evening sky, its blade dull from overuse. Usually, this square is a cacophony of rage, a screaming, drunken mob baying for the heads of aristocrats, priests, and traitors. But today, the square has fallen into a terrified, confused silence. There is a sound drifting toward the scaffold that the executioners of Paris have never encountered before. It is not the guttural pleading of a man begging for his life, nor the weeping of a mother watching her children starve. It is music. It is the Veni Creator Spiritus, a Latin hymn dating back centuries, sung with perfect crystalline clarity by 16 female voices. They are walking toward the wooden steps of the scaffold, not as prisoners marching to a grave, but as brides walking toward an altar. The executioner, Charles-Henri Sanson, a man who has severed thousands of heads with the dispassionate skill of a butcher, stands frozen. He watches as the first woman climbs the stairs, her voice never wavering. The blade drops with a wet thud. The singing continues, but now there are 15 voices. Another thud, 14 voices. The harmony thins, the volume drops, but the melody persists, haunting the silent mob. These are the Carmelites of Compiègne. They are 16 cloistered nuns who have not stepped foot outside their convent walls in decades. Women who dedicated their lives to silence and prayer. And today, the French Revolution is killing them for it. To understand why 16 peaceful women are being fed to the machine, you must understand the madness that has swallowed France. By the summer of 1794, the revolution, which began with high-minded ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity, has descended into a paranoid fever dream. The man holding the reins of this nightmare is Maximilien Robespierre. He is the master of the Committee of Public Safety, a title that stands as the grimiest irony of the era. For under his watch, no one is safe. Robespierre sees conspiracy in every shadow. To him, a hesitation to applaud at an execution is treason. A whispered word against the government is a death sentence. His solution to the chaos of the Republic is absolute, mathematical purity achieved through the blade. The Revolutionary Tribunal, his instrument of judgment, has ceased to be a court and has become an assembly line for corpses. In Paris alone, the National Razor claims 30, sometimes 40 lives in a single afternoon. The executioners have developed a rhythmic efficiency. Load, plank, drop, basket. 2 minutes per human life. The soil at the execution grounds has become so saturated with hemoglobin that it no longer drains. It pools in the gutters, turning the streets into open sewers of gore. Residents in the neighborhood have filed formal petitions, not about the morality of the murders, but about the smell. The stench of decomposing blood in the July heat is making the city unlivable. But while Robespierre hunts aristocrats and royalists, he reserves a special, icy venom for the Catholic Church. In his eyes, the Church is the ultimate enemy of reason, a relic of the old world that keeps the populace docile and superstitious. He doesn't just want to strip the Church of its power. He wants to eradicate the concept of the Christian God entirely. The new regime has launched a campaign of de-Christianization that borders on the absurd. They have torn down statues of saints and replaced them with busts of philosophers. They have rewritten the calendar, erasing Sundays and religious holidays, replacing weeks with 10-day decades to destroy the rhythm of worship. Churches are looted, their gold melted down for the war effort, their altars turned into temples of reason. Priests are given a choice: swear an oath to the state and renounce Rome, or face deportation and death. And perhaps the most symbolic crime of all, wearing a religious habit is now an act of treason punishable by the guillotine. 50 miles north of this urban slaughterhouse, in the quiet town of Compiègne, the 16 Carmelites watched the storm approach. For years, They had lived a life of total seclusion. Their world was the stone walls of their convent, their time marked not by the revolutionary calendar, but by the ringing of the bell for matins and vespers. But the revolution does not respect walls. In September 1792, the first blow landed. Revolutionary soldiers, drunk on power and wine, battered down the convent doors. They stripped the nuns of their property and expelled them from the only home many of them had ever known. The sisters were forced into the streets, forbidden to wear their habits, forbidden to live as a community. But their prioress, Mother Teresa of St. Augustine, was a woman of steel while wrapped in a gentle demeanor. She refused to let her family be destroyed. She secured 4 small, cramped apartments in the town, dividing the sisters into groups. They lived in secret, wearing civilian clothes, simple peasant dresses, but underneath, they remained Carmelites. They met in hushed tones, continuing their prayer cycles, turning their hiding places into a fragmented, invisible convent. It was during this time of hiding that Mother Teresa did something that would seal their fate, yet elevate their souls. She gathered the sisters and placed a terrifying question before them. She looked at the chaos consuming France, the massacres, the starvation, the loss of all moral compass, and she proposed an act of supreme mystical warfare. She asked if they would join her in a vow of martyrdom. They would offer their lives to God as a holistic sacrifice, begging that their blood might be the price to restore peace to France and end the terror. It was not a suicide pact. It was a theological bargain. At first, 2 of the older sisters recoiled. The instinct for survival is primal, and the guillotine was a terrifying reality, not an abstract concept. Mother Teresa did not scold them. She waited. She allowed them the grace of their fear. Within hours, the 2 sisters returned, weeping, asking for forgiveness. The community was unanimous. From that day forward, every morning at 4 a.m., as the sun struggled to rise over a bleeding nation, the 16 Carmelites renewed their vow. Lord, if you need a victim to save France, take us. For 2 years, they lived in the shadow of this promise. They did not seek arrest, but they prepared for it, sharpening their souls like swords. Then, in June 1794, the betrayal came. It is always a whisper that brings the house down. A neighbor, perhaps a shopkeeper they had trusted, or merely someone desperate for the bounty the state paid for exposing fanatics, went to the authorities. On June 21st, soldiers smashed into their apartments before dawn. The secrecy was over. The search was brutal and thorough. The soldiers tore through the meager possessions of the women, looking for gold or weapons. What they found was far more damning in the eyes of the Republic. Letters expressing sorrow for the execution of King Louis XVI, images of the Sacred Heart of Jesus, and small statues of the Virgin Mary. They found the tools of prayer. In the twisted logic of 1794, these were counter-revolutionary materials. The charge was drafted immediately: fanaticism. In plain language, their crime was believing in God more than they believed in the state. The 16 sisters were carted to Paris and thrown into the Conciergerie, the most notorious prison in France. This formidable Gothic fortress was known as the antechamber of death. It was a dark, rat-infested hellhole where prisoners waited for their appointment with the razor. Men and women wept openly, collapsed in their own filth, or went mad from the sheer terror of the waiting. But when the Carmelites arrived, the atmosphere shifted. The English Benedictine nuns, who were also imprisoned there, later wrote about the arrival of the women from Compiègne. They described them not as prisoners, but as radiant figures. Amidst the squalor, the Carmelites maintained their discipline. They organized their day around prayer. They shared their meager rations. They comforted the condemned. In a place that smelled of despair and unwashed bodies, they created a bubble of sanctity. They did not look like women awaiting execution. They looked, as one witness remarked, like they were preparing for a wedding. On July 12th, the order came to move them. But there was a logistical problem. The civilian clothes they had been wearing were soaked and being washed. The only clothing available to them were the religious habits they had kept hidden, the very tunics and veils that were illegal to wear. And so, By a twist of divine irony, the revolution forced them to dress as nuns once again. They traveled to the tribunal in their full religious regalia, a visual defiance of the laws that sought to crush them. The trial, held on July 17th, was a farce. To call it a legal proceeding would be an insult to justice. It was a bureaucratic formality required before the murder could take place. The prosecutor was Antoine Fouquier-Tinville, a man with a soul as dry as parchment. He had sent Marie Antoinette to her death. He had condemned scientists, poets, and generals without blinking. He looked at the 16 women with bored indifference. He rattled off the charges: hiding weapons, conspiring with the enemies of the Republic, fanaticism. The weapons were their crucifixes. The conspiracy was their prayer. But there was a moment in that sweltering courtroom that broke the script. When Fouquier-Tinville spat the word fanaticism, Mother Teresa interrupted him. Prisoners did not interrupt Fouquier-Tinville. The room went deadly quiet. "Citizen," she asked with a calm, piercing authority, "what do you mean by that word?" Fouquier-Tinville, irritated by the insect speaking back to him, sneered, "I mean your attachment to childish beliefs and your foolish religious practices." Mother Teresa turned to her sisters. She didn't look terrified. She looked relieved. A beatific smile spread across her face. "You heard him," she said to the nuns. "We are not dying for politics. We are not dying for the king. We are dying for our faith." She turned back to the prosecutor. If believing in God was a crime, then yes, they were guilty. They were happily, joyfully guilty. The tribunal offered them one last exit ramp. It was a standard procedure. Renounce your vows, swear hatred to the monarchy and loyalty to the Republic, and you can live. The doors of the courtroom are open. You can walk out. You can return to your families. They asked Constance, the youngest. She was 29 years old, a novice who had spent 9 years in the convent. She had her whole life ahead of her. Her answer was a quiet, firm no. They asked Sister Marie of the Incarnation. No. They asked Sister Euphrasia. No. 16 times the question was asked. 16 times the answer was the same. They would not trade their souls for their lives. The verdict was inevitable: death. Execution to be carried out immediately. Upon hearing the sentence, the nuns did not scream. They did not faint. Right there in the courtroom, surrounded by the men who had just condemned them, they knelt and renewed their religious vows. They thanked God for the privilege of martyrdom. The guards, hardened men who had seen everything, stared in open-mouthed confusion. They were used to dragging screaming prisoners away. They didn't know how to handle gratitude. The journey to the place du trône renversé took over an hour. The nuns were loaded into open tumbrils, rough wooden carts used to transport dung and the condemned. The streets of Paris were lined with spectators. Usually, this was the time for the Ca Ira and the Marseillaise, for jeering and throwing rod at the traitors. But as the carts rumbled over the cobblestones, the mob grew unsettled. The nuns were singing. They sang the Miserere. They sang the Salve Regina. Their voices projected over the noise of the wheels and the shouts of the drivers. People leaning out of windows fell silent. Shopkeepers stepped out onto the street, wiping their hands on their aprons, watching in disbelief. These women, dressed in their forbidden habits, looked peaceful. They were smiling at the crowd. It was a display of dignity that the streets of Paris had forgotten. When they reached the execution site, the smell of blood was overpowering. The sun was setting, casting long, red shadows across the square. Charles-Henri Sanson and his assistants were waiting. The scaffold was slippery. The nuns asked for one final favor: permission to finish their prayers. Sanson, perhaps sensing that this was no ordinary batch of victims, nodded. The 16 women gathered at the foot of the stairs and began the Veni Creator Spiritus. Come, Holy Spirit, Creator blessed, and in our souls take up thy rest. The crowd, usually a swirling pit of violence, became a cathedral of silence. Then, the ritual began. Mother Teresa had arranged the order of execution with the precision of a liturgy. The youngest would die first, the oldest last. This was an act of supreme maternal love. She would not force the young novices to watch their elders die and lose courage. She would send them to heaven first, and she, the mother, would be the last to leave, ensuring every single one of her daughters made it across the threshold. Constance was the first. She stepped out of the group. She was 29, radiant with a terrifying courage. She walked over Mother Teresa and knelt on the bloody stones. "Permission to die, Mother?" she asked. It was the same formula they used in the convent to ask permission to speak or to work. Mother Teresa placed her hand on a young woman's cheek. "Go, my child." Constance stood. She kissed a tiny terracotta statue of the Virgin Mary that the prioress held in her palm. She turned and walked toward the stairs. The executioner's assistants moved to grab her arms, to drag her up as they did with everyone else. Constance waved them away. "I do not need help," her gesture said. She climbed the steps alone, singing the Laudate Dominum. She lay down on the plank. The lunette, the wooden collar, snapped shut around her neck. She looked up at the sky. The blade fell. The singing continued. But now there were 15 voices. Sister St. Louis was next. She knelt. "Permission to die, Mother." "Go, my child." The kiss. The stairs. The blade. 14 voices. The crowd watched in a trance. There was no cheering. The usual bloodlust had evaporated, replaced by a profound, shaking awe. They were witnessing a victory that the guillotine could not touch. These women were not being killed. They were leaving. Sister Euphrasia, Sister Julie, Sister Henriette. One by one, the choir diminished. 13 voices. 12. 10. The pile of headless bodies in the basket grew. The blood flowed, but the singing never faltered. It was a countdown of extinguishing candles. Sister Mary of Jesus Crucified was 78 years old. She had been a Carmelite for half a century. Her body was frail, stiff with age, and she needed help to walk. But when she faced the executioner, she stopped. She looked Charles-Henri Sanson in the eye. He was a man accustomed to being cursed by the dying. She smiled at him. "I forgive you," she said, her voice clear in the hush of the square. "I forgive you with all my heart, and I pray that God forgives you too." Sanson stood stunned. He signaled his men to be gentle with her. She died instantly. Finally, only one voice remained. Mother Teresa of St. Augustine stood alone on the cobblestones. She was 41 years old. She had watched 15 of her sisters die. She had blessed them, encouraged them, and sent them into eternity. Now, there was no one left to bless her, no one to give her permission. She looked at the tiny statue of the Virgin in her hand, then at the silent, staring crowd. She sang the final verse of the Salve Regina alone. Her voice, strong and defiant, rang out against the stone facades of the square. She climbed the stairs. She did not hurry. She positioned herself on the plank, surrendering her spirit not to the Republic, but to her Creator. The blade fell. The song ended. The silence that followed was absolute. It was said that you could hear the wind moving through the trees. The crowd dispersed quietly, heads bowed, ashamed. They had come for a show, and they had been given a sermon in courage. The bodies were stripped and thrown into a mass grave at the Picpus Cemetery, mixing with the remains of 1,300 other victims of the terror. There were no markers, no funerals, just lime and dirt. But the vow, the mystical bargain they had made to sacrifice their lives to end the terror? 10 days later, that is the number that haunts historians. 10 days after the nuns ceased singing, the machinery of death jammed. On July 27th, the 9th of Thermidor in the revolutionary calendar, the National Convention turned on Robespierre. The man who had signed the nuns' death warrants was shouted down, arrested, and shot in the jaw. The next day, July 28th, Maximilien Robespierre was dragged to the very same scaffold where the Carmelites had died. He did not sing. His jaw was shattered, bound with a bandage. When the executioner ripped the bandage off, Robespierre screamed, a raw, animal shriek of agony that echoed across the square until the blade silenced him. With his death, the reign of terror collapsed. The fever broke. Was it a coincidence? A quirk of political timing? Perhaps. But the people of Paris didn't think so. The story of the 16 singing nuns spread like wildfire through the taverns and markets. The narrative took hold. The innocent blood of the Carmelites had satisfied the thirst of the beast. They had bought peace with their lives. The English Benedictine nuns who had watched them in prison survived. When they were finally released, they went to the cells the Carmelites had occupied. They found the civilian clothes the sisters had left behind, the peasant dresses they couldn't wear to their deaths. The Benedictines gathered them up, not as old clothes, but as relics of martyrs. They took them back to England, telling the story to anyone who would listen. The Catholic Church moves in centuries, not days. For a long time, Rome was silent, navigating the treacherous politics of post-revolutionary France. But the memory of the Compiègne martyrs refused to fade. In 1906, Pope Pius X beatified them, and in a move that spanned across time, in December 2024, Pope Francis officially inscribed them in the Catalogue of Saints. It took 230 years for the official decree, but the crowd at the Place du Trône had known the truth in a single afternoon. Today, if you go to Paris, skip the Eiffel Tower for a morning and find the Picpus Cemetery. It is hidden behind a nondescript wooden gate, away from the tourist buses. It is a private cemetery, holding the mass graves of the terror's victims. It is quiet there. Dark trees shade the grass. On a wall near the back, the names of the 16 Carmelites are engraved. Constance, Marie, Julie, Teresa. Every year on July 17th, a small group of people gathers there. They light candles. They stand in the grass near the pit where the bodies still lie. And they sing. They sing the Veni Creator Spiritus and the Salve Regina. The voices are fewer now, perhaps not as strong as the choir of 1794, but they are there. They're the echo that the guillotine could not cut. History is often written by the victors, by the men with the armies and the pens. But sometimes history is hijacked by the victims. The executioners of the French Revolution thought they were erasing 16 fanatic women from existence. Instead, they immortalized them. Robespierre is remembered as a warning, a symbol of ideology gone mad. But the Carmelites? They are remembered as a question that still hangs over us. What do you love enough to die for? And more importantly, what do you love enough to sing for while the blade is falling? If this story moved you, if you believe that these voices from the past deserve to be heard, do this channel a favor. Hit that subscribe button. Support us so we can keep digging up the history that was meant to be forgotten.